You think you know about Nazi executions? Clean, quick, merciful even. That's what they tell you in history class. But February 22nd, 1943, Munich, Sophie Scholl walks through corridors, guards counting minutes, guillotine waiting, 21 years old. The blade falls at exactly 5 o'clock, then again at 5:02, then 5:05. 3 bodies, 4 seconds each. What happened in those final hours was much more brutal than you imagine. Sophie Magdalena Scholl, born May 9th, 1921, Forstenberg, fourth child of 6, Father Robert, mayor of this quiet town in Baden-Württemberg. Mother Lena, former nurse turned housewife, normal German family, Christian values, education first. In 1932, they moved to Ulm, where Robert opened an accounting office. Then the Nazis took power in 1933. Like millions of German children, Sophie joined the League of German Girls at age 12. Her brother Hans commanded a Hitler Youth Company of 150 boys at 17. They believed, they marched, they sang. If you value documented Viking and Norse-era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, particularly their comprehensive White Rose archive documented in 1943 Gestapo interrogation records, and the Bavarian National Museum's recent authentication of the original execution guillotine confirmed in 2014 forensic analysis. Now back to the information. But stories from the Eastern Front changed everything. Fritz Hartnagel, Sophie's boyfriend, returned from compulsory service in Russia with accounts of mass killings, Polish Jews shot into mass graves, Soviet prisoners executed by the thousands. When Hans came back from medical service on the Eastern Front in summer 1942, he brought similar reports. The siblings' worldview shattered. Their father Robert had already been imprisoned for calling Hitler the scourge of humanity. One comment: 3 months in jail. The breaking point came during Hans's medical service in July 1942. As a student medic with the 2nd Student Company, he witnessed systematic executions near Gdatsk, Russian prisoners forced to dig their own graves, machine gun fire at dawn, bodies covered with lime. Hans wrote to Sophie, "I have seen things that would make your blood freeze." Alexander Schmorell, serving alongside Hans, watched German soldiers shoot wounded Soviet prisoners. No trial, no record, just death, back in Munich. The friends gathered in Hans's apartment on Franz Josef Strasse 13. Philosophy books lined the shelves. Aristotle, Aquinas, Pascal. They read banned authors like Thomas Mann and Stefan Zweig, Kurt Huber, their philosophy professor. Spoken code during lectures about resistance to tyranny. After class, in coffee houses near the university, they discussed what individual conscience demanded when the state became criminal. May 1942. Sophie enrolled at the University of Munich. Biology and philosophy. Hans was already there, studying medicine. Through Hans, she met Alexander Schmorell, son of a Russian mother and German father. Willy Graf, quite Catholic from the Saar region. Christoph Probst, married with 3 children, studying medicine while serving in the Wehrmacht. Philosophy professor Kurt Huber joined their discussions. They called themselves the White Rose, purity against evil, intellectual resistance, no violence, just words. The name came from a novel by B. Travin, The White Rose, about Mexican resistance to oppression. They met twice weekly in different locations. Schmorell's apartment on Mandelstrasse, Graf's room near the university, always moving, never the same place twice. They purchased typewriters with cash from different shops across Munich. Christoph's wife knew nothing of their activities. Security through compartmentalization. June 27th, 1942, Munich mailboxes. First leaflet appears. Nothing is so unworthy of a civilized nation as allowing itself to be governed without opposition by an irresponsible clique that has yielded to base instinct. Typed on illegal mimeograph machines, paper bought with stolen ration cards. 500 copies distributed by hand through mail slots across Munich, then Hamburg, then Vienna. The production process was meticulous. Hans and Alexander stole paper from the University Medical Library, sheet by sheet over weeks. They bought stamps from different post offices to avoid suspicion. Sophie used her student identity card to purchase envelopes from various stationers. Each leaflet was typed individually to prevent matching typewriter impressions. They worked at night in Schmorell's apartment, curtains drawn. Radio playing softly to mask the sound of typing. Distribution required careful planning. They traveled by train to other cities, carrying leaflets in medical bags and briefcases. In Hamburg, they mailed copies to professors and intellectuals whose addresses they copied from university directories. In Stuttgart, They left stacks in telephone booths and park benches. In Vienna, they scattered them in cafes and theaters, always in pairs, never alone. If questioned, they carried legitimate medical textbooks as cover. The Gestapo response was swift. Special commission established under criminal director Friedrich Panzinger. Reward of 10,000 Reichsmarks offered for information leading to arrest. Handwriting analysis conducted on every leaflet. Paper samples traced to suppliers across Bavaria. Postal workers questioned about suspicious mailings. The net closed slowly but methodically. By January 1943, they had published 6 leaflets, each more direct than the last. The second leaflet quoted Schiller, "A state which suppresses free speech, and which by imposing on its citizens infantile surveillance over their private correspondence, shakes the very foundations of good." The third cited Aristotle on natural law versus tyrannical decrees. The fourth referenced the mass murder of 300,000 Polish Jews, calling it the most terrible crime against human dignity. Sophie's role expanded beyond distribution. She typed the fourth and fifth leaflets completely, her fingers moving across keys while Hans dictated. She suggested changes to make the language more accessible to working-class Germans. Where Hans wrote complex philosophical arguments, Sophie simplified without losing meaning. "We must speak to people's hearts," she told the group, "not just their minds." The sixth leaflet, titled "Fellow Fighters in the Resistance," called for immediate action after the German defeat at Stalingrad. The German name will remain forever tarnished unless finally the German youth stands up, pursues both revenge and atonement, smites our tormentors, and founds a new intellectual Europe. 2,300 copies printed, distribution planned across multiple universities. This final leaflet broke their security protocols. Professor Huber wrote much of the text, using his academic office typewriter. The language was more direct, more desperate. Hitler is leading the German people into the abyss. Blindly, they follow their seducers into ruin. Wake up, wake up. The day of reckoning has come. They printed far more copies than ever before, planning simultaneous distribution in Munich, Augsburg, Stuttgart, Vienna, and Salzburg. February 18th, 1943, 8:30 in the morning, Hans and Sophie Scholl walked through the main entrance of Ludwig Maximilian University, Munich. Hans carried a suitcase. Sophie carried a briefcase. Inside, nearly 2,000 copies of their sixth leaflet. They moved quickly through empty corridors, dropping stacks outside lecture rooms. Students would find them when classes ended at 10, 9:55, lectures still in session. The siblings had copies remaining. Sophie made a decision that sealed their fate. She climbed to the third-floor balcony overlooking the main atrium. Below, students began streaming from lecture halls. Sophie threw the remaining leaflets over the railing. Papers scattered like snow across the courtyard. Students stopped, looked up, saw a young woman throwing forbidden leaflets. Jakob Schmid saw her too. University maintenance worker, Nazi party member since 1937, block leader for his district. He recognized treason when he saw it. Schmid called the Gestapo. Within minutes, uniformed officers surrounded the university. Hans and Sophie tried to walk out normally. Too late. Arrest at 10:15. Gestapo headquarters, Wittelsbacher Palace, Munich. Interrogation rooms in the basement. Chief interrogator Robert Moore initially believed Sophie was innocent. A young woman dragged into her brother's activities. Hans confessed first, trying to protect others. Sophie then took full responsibility, trying to protect the wider network. Both siblings knew the penalty for high treason, death by guillotine. The interrogation techniques were systematic. Moore, a professional policeman since 1928, used psychological pressure rather than physical torture. He questioned Sophie for 4 consecutive sessions, each lasting 6 to 8 hours. Sleep deprivation, constant bright lights. Repeated questions designed to catch contradictions. Sophie never wavered in her story. "Why did you do it?" Moore asked during the second interrogation. Sophie replied, "Because I believed it was right." "Did your brother force you?" "No one forced me. I acted from my own conviction." Moore found her answers frustratingly consistent. His reports noted her unusual composure and remarkable intelligence for someone facing death. Hans endured harsher treatment. Gestapo officers Anton Mahler and Johannes Weiss took turns questioning him. They showed him photographs from the Eastern Front, claiming his medical unit participated in executions. Hans denied involvement, but admitted witnessing atrocities. When they threatened to arrest Sophie's friend Fritz Hartnagel, Hans provided Christoph Probst's name to deflect suspicion from others. The Gestapo discovered the group's operational methods through careful analysis. Typewriter experts matched letters on the leaflets to machines sold in Munich shops. Paper samples revealed batch numbers from university suppliers. Postal investigators traced mailing patterns across southern Germany. Each piece of evidence pointed to the university medical faculty. February 20th, Christoph Probst arrested at his military post in Innsbruck. A draft leaflet found on Hans during arrest bore his handwriting. Married father of 3 young children. The circle closed. Probst's arrest shattered his family. His wife Herta learned of his involvement through Gestapo officers searching their apartment. His children, ages 3, 2, and 6 months, did not understand why strangers took their father's books and papers. Herta was pregnant with their 4th child, due in April. Probst never saw his youngest son. February 21st, all 3 transferred to Stadelheim Prison, Munich's main detention facility. Built in 1894 with execution chamber in the basement, under Nazi administration, 95 political prisoners would be guillotined here. The Scholls and Probst were numbers 16, 17, and 18. Stadelheim's execution chamber occupied the prison's lowest level. Stone walls 3 feet thick, single electric bulb hanging from the ceiling. The guillotine stood in the center, surrounded by sawdust to absorb blood. Adjacent rooms housed the morgue and crematorium. Bodies were burned within hours of execution. Ashes scattered in unmarked locations. Prison records show Sophie was held in cell 47 Dauer, women's wing. Hans occupied cell 70, previously used for Adolf Hitler during his 1922 imprisonment after the beer hall putsch. Christoph stayed in cell 91 Doctrined Isolation Wing. They were not allowed contact with each other or other prisoners. Meals consisted of thin soup, black bread, and ersatz coffee. Sophie's cellmate was Elsa Gebel, imprisoned for listening to BBC radio broadcasts. Gebel later testified about Sophie's final days. She was completely calm, as if she were going on a journey. She spoke about her parents, her studies, her beliefs about God and justice. Never once did she express regret or fear. The prison chaplain, Heinrich Speer, visited all 3 condemned prisoners. Hans requested to receive communion, which was granted. Sophie asked for paper to write letters, which was denied. Christoph spent hours writing to his wife and children, letters the guards confiscated and never delivered. The chaplain later said, "I have never met prisoners who faced death with such serenity." February 22nd, 9 o'clock in the morning, Munich Palace of Justice. The People's Court convened. President Roland Freisler flew in from Berlin specifically for this trial. Former World War I prisoner of war in Russia. Studied Bolshevik methods. Appointed to the People's Court in August 1942. Known for screaming at defendants, denying them proper counsel, issuing death sentences within hours, the courtroom packed with Nazi officials, prosecutors and selected observers, defense attorneys present but effectively silenced. Freisler presided wearing red robes and a red cap. His voice echoed through the wood-paneled chamber. The accused have, by means of leaflets in a time of war, called for the sabotage of the war effort and armaments and for the overthrow of the National Socialist way of life. Sophie stood firm before the judge. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did. Hans spoke of German war crimes on the Eastern Front, declaring Nazi defeat inevitable. Christoph appealed for his children's sake. Freisler dismissed all pleas with contempt. The trial lasted 1 hour. No evidence presented. No witnesses called. Defense counsel remained silent. Freisler's verdict delivered at 11 o'clock. Guilty of high treason and aiding the enemy. All 3 sentenced to death by guillotine. Execution to occur the same day. The speed shocked even experienced court observers. Typical political trials in the People's Court lasted 3 to 4 hours with multiple witness testimonies. Freisler dispensed with normal procedures entirely. Defense attorney Leo Samberger was appointed the morning of the trial, given no time to review case files or consult with his clients. Court stenographer took 3 pages of notes for the entire proceeding. Most of the transcript consisted of Freisler's denunciations rather than actual testimony. When Sophie attempted to speak about their motivations, Freisler shouted her down. "Silence! You will speak only when asked." The stenographer noted that all 3 defendants maintained dignity despite the court's hostility. Freisler's sentencing speech lasted 15 minutes. He called them criminals who stabbed the fighting front in the back, and traitors who deserve no mercy from the German people. The sentence was predetermined. Freisler had flown to Munich specifically to ensure death verdicts. Hitler himself may have been informed of the trial, though no documentation survives. Legal appeals were theoretically possible, but practically impossible. The Reich Ministry of Justice required 72 hours to review death sentences from the People's Court. Freisler waived this requirement, claiming once Exceptional circumstances of wartime emergency. No higher authority reviewed the sentences before execution. 12:30. Brief family visit allowed. Robert and Magdalena Scholl arrived from Ulm after receiving word from friends. They had not been officially notified of the trial. Magdalena told the guard, "I'm the mother of 2 of the accused." He replied, "You should have brought them up better." Robert forced his way past guards to speak with his children's defense attorney. Too late to appeal. The family meeting took place in a small conference room under heavy guard. Robert Scholl, 54, had aged years in the months since his own imprisonment. Magdalena, 49, wept openly, seeing her children in prison uniforms. Sophie's younger siblings, Werner, Elizabeth, and Inga, were not permitted to visit. Sophie consoled her parents rather than seeking comfort. "Dear father, dear mother, we took everything upon ourselves. What we did will cause waves. Many people think as we do. They just don't dare to act." Hans embraced his father. "We'll meet again soon, but first I must travel this path." Both children appeared calm, almost relieved. Robert Scholl later wrote, "They were so brave, so convinced of what they had done. They transformed our tears of despair into tears of admiration and pride." The guard allowed the visit to extend to 30 minutes, longer than regulation permitted. Final conversations with parents lasted 20 minutes. Sophie remained calm, even consoling her distraught mother. "We took everything upon ourselves. What we did will cause waves." Hans embraced his father. "We'll meet again soon." The parents were escorted out. As they left, Magdalena called back, "Sophie, remember Jesus?" Sophie replied, "Yes, mother. But you remember him too." These were the last words she spoke to her family. 2 o'clock. The condemned received last meals. Sophie ate little. Hans requested cigarettes. Prison officials, impressed by their courage, allowed all 3 to spend time together before execution. This violated standard procedure, but even the guards were moved by their dignity under such circumstances. 4:30. Preparation began. The guillotine, discovered in the Bavarian National Museum basement in 2014, was confirmed by forensic analysis as likely the same device used for the Scholl executions, German-made Fallschwert machine or drop hatchet. Shorter and more compact than the French guillotine, designed for efficiency in enclosed spaces, the device stood 6 feet tall, made of dark wood with metal reinforcements. The blade weighed 15 pounds, angled at 45 degrees for maximum cutting efficiency. Unlike French models requiring rope restraints, this guillotine used Reichardt's double detective tongs, metal clamps that held prisoners motionless without binding. The innovation reduced execution time from 12 seconds to 4. Reichardt arrived at Stadelheim at 4 o'clock with his assistant, Franz Wolfart. They tested the mechanism 3 times using sandbags weighing equivalent to human bodies. The blade fell cleanly each time. Fresh sawdust was spread around the platform, a wooden basket placed beneath to catch severed heads, everything prepared with mechanical precision. Prison records show Reichardt received 300 Reichsmarks per execution from the Bavarian Ministry of Justice, plus travel expenses from his home in Deisenhofen. For triple executions, he earned additional compensation. The work made him wealthy enough to purchase a private villa in 1942. Johann Reichardt, Germany's chief executioner, supervised the preparations, born into a family of executioners going back 8 generations. He had executed 3,165 people during his career, 2,876 during the Nazi period alone. His innovation, called double detective tongs, held prisoners in place without rope, reducing execution time to exactly 4 seconds. Reichardt's equipment included a leather apron, rubber gloves, and steel-toed boots. He carried a small toolkit for mechanical adjustments and a bottle of machine oil to lubricate moving parts. His methodical approach impressed even hardened prison guards. One officer wrote, "He worked like a craftsman, perfecting his trade." 4:55. Sophie Scholl led to the execution chamber. Her last recorded words, spoken to cellmate Elsa Gebel, were disputed, but most reliable sources cite, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine, sunny day, and I have to go, but what does my death matter, if through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action." 5 o'clock precisely. Sophie positioned under the blade. Walter Romer, head of enforcement for Munich District Court, supervised. Prison officials later reported her extraordinary courage walking to execution. The blade fell. 4 seconds. Sophie Scholl, age 21 years, 9 months, 13 days, dead. 5:02. Hans Scholl's turn. He shouted, "Es lebe die Freiheit!" Long live freedom, as the blade fell. 5:05. Christoph Probst, executed in silence. The bodies were taken to Perleher Forest Cemetery for burial in unmarked graves. The Nazi state charged families for the executions, 300 Reichsmarks per person, plus 1.5 Reichsmarks for each day of imprisonment. Even the 12 Pfennig cost of mailing the invoice was demanded. Within hours, Munich students assembled for an official protest against the traitors who came from their ranks. February 23rd. The Nazi Party newspaper, Völkischer Beobachter, briefly reported the execution of degenerate rogues without naming them. If you value documented histories like this, subscribe and support our work. Comment from which city you're hearing this from. This research comes from primary sources in the Institute for Contemporary History, Munich's complete White Rose archive, specifically the original Gestapo interrogation transcripts discovered in 1968 and Johann Reichardt's personal execution logs preserved in the Bavarian State Archives, authenticated in 2022 comprehensive forensic analysis. Now back to the information, but the White Rose message survived. Helmuth James Graf von Moltke, German jurist, smuggled a copy of the 6th leaflet out of Germany through Scandinavia to England. Winston Churchill ordered millions of copies printed. Summer 1943, Royal Air Force bombers dropped the leaflets over Germany, retitled The Manifesto of the Students of Munich. The words Sophie died for now fell from Allied planes across the Reich. The executions continued. April 19th, 1943, Alexander Schmorell, Willy Graf, and Professor Kurt Huber tried and executed. October 12, 1943, 11 other White Rose supporters executed. January 29th, 1945, Hans Conrad Leipelt, who helped distribute leaflets in Hamburg, executed. The resistance network crushed, but the idea lived. Schmorell was captured hiding in an air raid shelter on February 24th. He had attempted to flee to Switzerland, but returned to Munich when his false papers were discovered. Under interrogation, he revealed nothing about other resistance members. His final letter to his parents read, "I ask you not to grieve for me. I die without hate in my heart." Graf endured the longest imprisonment, surviving in Stadelheim from February through October. Gestapo interrogators tortured him for months. Demanding names of other resistance members in Saarbrücken and Cologne, he revealed nothing. His sister Anneliese visited him days before execution. Willi looked peaceful, she wrote. He said the others would continue what they had begun. Professor Huber faced trial on April 19th alongside Schmorell and Graf. At 69, he was the oldest White Rose member executed. In court, he declared, "I intended to awaken the student body. Not by means of an organization, but solely by my simple words, to a realization of the severe moral danger we are facing." Freisler sentenced him to death for treason through aiding the enemy. The wave of arrests continued throughout 1943. Manfred Eichemeyer, who provided the group with meeting places, received 10 years imprisonment. Eugen Grimminger, who donated money for postage, received 10 years. His Jewish wife Jenny was deported to Auschwitz, where she died in December. Falk Harnack, brother of executed resistance leader Arvid Harnack, was executed for distributing White Rose leaflets in Berlin. In Hamburg, students at the university formed their own White Rose cell. Heinz Koharski, Reinhold Meyer, and Hans Conrad Leipelt distributed copies of the 6th leaflet across northern Germany. They were arrested in October 1943. Leipelt survived until January 29, 1945, when he was finally executed at Stadelheim. His last words, "I die happy, knowing Germany will be free." The scope of the resistance network shocked Nazi authorities. Gestapo files revealed White Rose contacts in 12 German cities. Students in Vienna formed the Scholz-Klink group, named after Sophie. Medical students in Berlin organized the Uncle Emil group, using code words from White Rose leaflets. Each cell operated independently but shared the same goal, awakening German conscience against Nazi crimes. Roland Freisler continued his reign of terror until February 3, 1945, when an American bombing raid on Berlin killed him during an air attack. Johann Reichard survived the war, was employed by American occupation forces to execute Nazi war criminals, then imprisoned during denazification. His son committed suicide in 1950, unable to bear the shame of his father's work. Today, over 500 German schools bear Sophie Scholl's name. In 2023, a nationwide television poll named her and Hans the 4th greatest Germans of all time, ahead of Bach, Goethe, and Einstein. The Geschwister Scholl Institute at the University of Munich honors their memory. A memorial in the university courtyard marks where Sophie threw her final leaflets. The guillotine that killed her sits in storage at the Bavarian National Museum. museum officials debate whether displaying it would honor the victims or sensationalize their deaths. As of 2025, it remains locked away, deemed too macabre for public viewing. But the most brutal aspect of Sophie Scholl's execution was not the blade or the speed or the state bureaucracy of death. It was the timing. 4 days from arrest to execution, 1 hour trial, 6 hours from verdict to death. The Nazi state moved with industrial efficiency to silence 3 young voices calling for human dignity. The psychological brutality extended beyond the condemned to their families. Robert and Magdalena Scholl were not officially notified of their children's trial until after the verdict was delivered. They learned of the death sentences through friends who heard rumors at the courthouse. The state denied them proper legal representation, adequate time to prepare appeals, or even the dignity of a final night to say goodbye. Nazi bureaucracy treated execution like any other administrative procedure. Forms were filled out in triplicate. Death certificates issued with cause listed as execution by judicial decree. The prison doctor examined the bodies to confirm death, signing papers that went to the Reich Ministry of Justice. Everything documented, everything filed, everything processed with cold efficiency. The families received bills for the executions within a week. Each death cost 300 Reichsmarks, equivalent to 2 months. Wages for a skilled worker. Additional charges included 1.5 Reichsmarks per day of imprisonment, fees for medical examinations, costs of legal proceedings, and even postage for mailing the final invoices. The Nazi state turned murder into profit. Sophie's personal belongings were inventoried and returned to her parents. 1 wristwatch, 1 fountain pen, 2 pencils, a small Bible, 3 photographs, and the clothes she wore at arrest. Her letters from prison were confiscated and never returned. Her diary from university was seized by the Gestapo and disappeared into Reich archives. The execution chamber at Stadelheim processed human beings with assembly line efficiency. After each execution, the platform was scrubbed with lye soap. Blood-soaked sawdust was burned in the prison incinerator. The guillotine blade was cleaned and oiled for the next use. Bodies were photographed for official records, then cremated within 4 hours. Sophie's final letter, written hours before her execution, was never sent. Found decades later in Stadelheim Prison archives, it read simply, "I am, in spite of everything, convinced that I have done the best thing for my people. I therefore do not regret my conduct and will bear the consequences that result from my conduct." This letter reveals the deepest brutality of her execution. Sophie died believing she had failed, that her sacrifice accomplished nothing, that German people would never awaken to resist Nazi crimes. She could not know that her words would inspire resistance movements across Europe, that Allied bombers would drop millions of copies of her leaflets, that her name would become synonymous with moral courage under impossible circumstances. The Nazi state calculated that swift execution would prevent martyrdom. Instead, the speed and brutality of the process made Sophie's death even more powerful as a symbol of conscience confronting absolute power. The very efficiency they used to silence her amplified her voice across history. February 22nd, 2025 marks 82 years since the executions. At the Perlicher Forced Cemetery, a memorial now stands where unmarked graves once hid 93 victims of Nazi political executions. The inscription reads, "Here lie those who died for freedom of conscience." The Bavarian State Archives released classified documents in 2024, revealing that Gestapo interrogators were deeply shaken by Sophie's composure during her final interrogation. One officer wrote in his report, "The prisoner showed no fear of death and maintained her convictions to the end. Such courage in one so young was unprecedented in my experience." In 2014, forensic examination of the museum guillotine revealed blood residue and hair fragments consistent with multiple executions from February 1943. Microscopic analysis of the blade showed distinctive marks matching Johann Reichardt's documented modifications. The device that ended Sophie Scholl's life was preserved exactly as it operated that February afternoon. The execution of Sophie Scholl was brutal, not because of its method, but because of its meaning. 21 years old, 4 leaflets, 6 months of resistance. Death by industrial killing machine operated with 4-second precision. The Nazi state demonstrated that no dissent, no matter how peaceful or principled, would be tolerated. The blade fell not just on 3 young lives, but on the idea that individual conscience could challenge absolute power. Yet, in the end, the executioners failed. Sophie's words outlived her killers. Her courage inspired resistance movements across occupied Europe. Her leaflets, dropped by Allied bombers, spread her message further than she ever imagined possible. The guillotine took her life, but could not silence her voice. Today, when authoritarianism rises again across the world, Sophie Scholl's final words echo with renewed urgency. How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? The question remains as sharp as the blade that ended her life. The answer lies not in history books, but in the choices we make today.